Welcome, everybody. Appreciate you being here on a day that was a little surprising weather-wise. I want to welcome you to the Great Books mini lectures. Before we start, as always, I want to thank the CoLab, which is particularly apt today. I want to thank video production, the marketing team. I want to thank Maureen Fitzpatrick, who helps me coordinate this. We love this program, and this is our spring series. We've got a couple more to go this semester. Hope you join us. To begin, Jodie Dietz is the coordinator of the Collaboration Center. In other words, this is her empire. If you are not familiar with the CoLab or the college, the CoLab provides resources to help students, faculty, and the community partners to create a collaborative learning opportunity. It offers workspaces, technology, all focused on student success, and the CoLab allows this to happen. So we are forever grateful. Jodie has been with Johnson County Community College for 5 years. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice with a minor in Political Science from the University of Nebraska and a master's degree in management from Baker University. Jodie is a former Johnson County Court probation officer, and she currently sits on the Blue Valley School Board. Now, I didn't intentionally connect those two occupations or jobs or positions, but I'll leave that to you to think about. She also works on the Overland Park Community Development Block Grant Committee and the Board of Directors for CAPS Network, which is the Center for Advanced Professional Studies. She is Regional Vice President of the Kansas Association of School Boards, and after 2 terms, stepped off from the Friends of the Johnson County Library Board this past December. Outside of her time at the college and all of those other duties, Jodie has a passion for book clubs, museums of all kinds, crocheting, stained glass, and this is near and dear to my heart, advocating for public education. Thank you, Jodie, for doing that. Keep fighting the good fight, please. All right. Today's lecture covers Reading Lolita in Tehran, published in 2003. Like we do with all of these lectures, we asked Jodie why she chose this book. And here's what she said. This book made an impact on me as it told the story of how a group of women resisted a tyrannical government through the study of classic novels. I am haunted by the reality of how women in Iran lost so many rights, a bit at a time, within just a few years, and what that teaches us for our future. Friends, Jodie Dietz.
Guess I'll turn this on. Can everybody hear me? Okay, excellent. So when I was asked if I would be interested by these wonderful people here in doing a book talk presentation, I'm like, oh, heck yeah. And this was like early last fall, maybe into the summer. And I'm like, oh, yeah. And this is one of my, the books that's kind of stuck with me. I probably read it. It came out in 2003. I probably read it 2005 or so. But that's one it's stuck with me. And I'm like, I would love to do that. Now, for me, it feels as though recent events have made this book even more timely. I just got back last night from Washington, D.C., advocating for public education, talking to various members of leadership. And this is, as I had said and given Michael, it's haunting. I feel like it's a very haunting time right now. So anyhow, we're going to just dive in and just bear with me a little bit because I'm usually used to like book clubs where we've all kind of read at least a piece of the book and kind of have dialogue, and not having that dialogue is a little tricky for me. So, and you'll notice in some of my slides, it's a little wordy, and I apologize ahead of time. So, okay, so like I said, published in 2003, the author Azar Nafisi is an Iranian-born literature professor. She was born and raised in Iran, Tehran specifically, and then did her education in the United States. She graduated from the University of Oklahoma with her PhD. And then in like 1978, 1979, she decided to go back. She missed her home country. She missed, like kind of many of us do when you move away, she missed what she remembered Tehran to be. She steps off the plane, and right away she's confronted with the airport security. They're doing extra checks on women. And so I'll talk a little bit about the revolution, but she noticed right away, it was just different. It was a little different than what she had left. Hopefully I'll talk about 3 different areas: the power of literature as a resistance, power of storytelling. Oh my gosh. I think we don't understand how important that part of it is. And that's something I'm trying to do better at when I do talk about things, whether it be here in the CoLab with my job or with public education or advocacy for books. Storytelling is incredibly important for people to hear. And then talking about how she talks about the intersection of her family's lives and the political environment. Okay, so I went over this a little bit. 1980. Okay, she returned. She had a teaching job at the University of Tehran in 1980. I think it was like 1980. So she worked for 1 year, and before she was terminated. So if you don't know a lot about kind of what happened with the revolution, so they had a Shah who was there from 1941 until like 1978. He was seen as kind of a modernizer, industrialized, would work with Western cultures and countries. He wasn't as democratic maybe as we think he would have been, so people felt like they were being oppressed. And so there was an uprising, they called the revolution, and the Shah was kind of ousted from Iran at that time, ended up in the US going through cancer treatments, ironically, right? And then the US did not have extradition for the charges that he was under. And so we did not allow extradition back. So when they had the revolution in '79, they were kind of in a state of turmoil. Nobody knew who was in charge, right? And so about a year later, the Islamic Republican Party ended up taking over control. And they were actually a pretty small minority group at the time, but they ended up kind of gaining control. And that's really then what followed is their kind of rules, dictates, edicts, belief in the way culture should be, which heavily impacted women. I talk a little bit about one of the big things they implemented was the morality police. Basically, I think it was a Toyota vehicle of some sort, I can't remember what kind. Usually a couple males and a couple females would drive around in these, I think it was a white Toyota truck all over the city, and they would stop women. And if they thought that somehow they were violating, you were supposed to have your veil on at all times. But if you saw hair, or if they thought you had makeup on, if you were walking with a male and they didn't believe it was your brother or father, you would get pulled over, and sometimes they took you. Sometimes you were put into kind of holding places. And they talk about a few examples in the book of families didn't always know where you were at. One of the girls that we'll talk about that was part of this secret book club was in jail or prison for 5 years. So, why, and this is from the author's perspective. She wanted to tell people her story because she thought that totalitarian mindsets confiscate everybody's story, and the way to confront this is to not take up guns or demand regime changes, but to tell your own story. So this is the power of storytelling, right? Over here in the US, she said, we should remember that just because there is a democracy, this does not mean that there is not censorship. She talks about a book by Diane Ravitch called The Language Police, which is about censorship from both extreme left and extreme right groups in textbooks. Many library books are taken off the shelves, even as we know, Harry Potter is on the banned books list, for heaven's sakes. Public libraries are frequently being shut down because of insufficient funding. So my experience, having sat on the school board through COVID and currently, as well as my membership over the last few years with the Friends of the Library, I've seen firsthand the number of demands made from certain groups of people to take books off the shelf. And it's frightening for me. These books, whether it be through our library system or our schools, are carefully cultivated. They're carefully chosen. And they fit many different criteria. For example, in our public schools, it's specific for grade levels, right? There is many different tools that are used. And for someone to come in and just say, I don't like it, or I think it's teaching you this, I think that's concerning. Let's see. Something that she did write over and over, that she didn't write this book to tell Americans how deprived they were, how bad Iran is. That's not why she wrote it. She loves her home country, but she wanted us to know her story, and possibly, and I keep saying this over and over, a cautionary tale for others, right? Okay, I know there's a lot of boxes on here. I know that. So I'm going to talk first of all about how she spoke about literature as a form of resistance and how they use these Western classics. Lolita, Wuthering Heights, Tom Sawyer, as a way of, breaking out of and protecting yourself in many ways. I chose a number of pieces from the book that I thought really exemplified kind of this topic. So like here, we were not looking for blueprints, but for an easy solution, but we did hope to find a link between the open spaces of the novels provided and the closed ones we were confined to. This is escape, right? Thank heavens they were able to use this to survive their environment. This disparate truth of Lolita's story is not about the rape of a 12-year-old by a dirty old man, but the confiscation of one individual's life by another. That just gives me chills when I think about that. So let's see. A great novel heightens your senses and sensitivity to the complexities of life and of individuals and prevents you from the self-righteousness that sees morality and fixed formulas about good and evil. And honestly, I think we can all fall into that. And I think it's good to remember, right, that we need to be open. We need to understand others. We need to not impose what we feel as though our morality is on others. So she talks about women and oppression. It's a big deal. I know I mentioned a little bit about the morality police right here. So when she was teaching at the University of Tehran, they had this beautiful, it's a beautiful, beautiful university, right? Beautiful gates you walk into, except for the women. So once this regime took over, the women, there was built a little side gate. And the women could only walk through that gate, and there was like a guard shack or a little building there, and they actually had to be, I don't want to say stripped down, but they were their clothing was checked out, their bags were searched, couldn't have a stray hair out of place, no makeup whatsoever. If you had makeup in your bag, that was confiscated. So they wanted to make for sure that that women they were complying with their laws and had very little control. I think this is interesting too. Later, women were banned from singing because of a woman's voice, like her hair was sexually provocative and should be kept hidden. I think that this is what they're trying to, the regime that they're living under right now. This one is powerful too. It was not a piece of cloth that I rejected. And she's talking about the scarf, the veil. It was the transformation being imposed upon me that made me look in the mirror and hate the stranger I had become. A number of times they mention that, those who were of the Islamic faith, willingly wore their scarves. That was part of their pact, their agreement with God. And when it became mandatory, that took that sacred experience, that sacred gesture away from them. So, personal v. political. How personal choices became political under the regime, and then the author struggles with censorship. So this is, I think, really interesting. She talks about her grandmother back in, late 60s, early 70s. Tehran was just a wealth of color and beauty. Women walked in the streets just incredibly well decked out in color and beautiful fabrics. And women held leadership positions politically, through corporations. It was a very, very liberating society for both men and women. And so she said, is she angry that women of her mother's generation could walk the streets freely, enjoy the company of the opposite sex, join the police force, become pilots, live under laws that were among the most progressive in the world regarding women? Does she feel humiliated by the new laws, by the fact that after the revolution, the age of marriage was lowered from 18 to 9, that stoning became one more of the punishment for adultery and prostitution? Also down here, she said, you ask me what it means to be irrelevant. The feeling is akin to visiting your old house as a wandering ghost with unfinished business. Imagine going back. The structure's familiar, but the door is now metal instead of wood. The walls have been painted a garish pink. The easy chair you loved so much is gone. Your office is now the family room, and your beloved bookcases have been replaced by a brand new television set. This is your house, but it's not. And you are no longer relevant to this house, to its walls and doors and floors. You are not seen. So I think as her ability to write, for me at least, is incredibly powerful. I think she packs so much into these little snippets of dialogue. So. Identity, kind of the loss of identity for her, as well as the women in Iran at the time. As I stood there alone on the hospital grounds with people rushing around me, I had a strange experience. I felt tired and frightened. The fear was not the bullets. They were too immediate. I was scared of some lack, as if the future was receding from me. She talks about, so after she was terminated from the University of Tehran, which is an interesting thing to note too. So she was terminated because she refused to wear the veil. She had thought, and one of these talks about, she had thought higher ed, education, she was safe. She thought they are never gonna touch higher ed. She was wrong, because they did. And so she ended up she was terminated from the University of Tehran, but originally when she tried to resign on her own terms, they refused to accept her resignation. So it's all about control, right? So she was off a few years, she had a couple kiddos, was doing some writing for various magazines and all, and then she was asked by a different university in Tehran to teach. And that just lasted, a few years, which is during the time when she created what the point of this book is, which is a kind of a secret women's book club. So her goal was to create a opportunity for young female students that she had to come in and talk in great depths about classic literature. The Wuthering Heights, the Tom Sawyers, the Lolitas. And so it was kind of towards the end of her tenure in Tehran that she really started this book club. Let's see here. Oh, conclusions already. So this talks about the book club. They came to my house in a disembodied state of suspension, bringing to my living room their secrets, their pains, and their gifts. There's one, oh, here we go. In forcing us underground, it also made us more appealing, more dangerous, and in a strange way, more powerful. It made us scarce, and because of this, also in demand. So they decided to have us back, perhaps partly to be more certain of their control. They started to connect people like me who had once been branded as decadent and westernized. So they realized that this extreme control over women in their society was actually having the kind of converse or inverted outcome that they couldn't control them. So she did go into kind of a deep dive on, this totalitarian mindset, forcing your citizens to do what they wanted to, and then the interesting kind of dichotomy of ending up being complicit in their crimes too, which is something that she really talked about in her book of having to kind of reconcile with. So one of the, I think, important ones that comes out to me too is by Nabokov, which is the writer of Lolita and Invitation to a Beheading and some other works like that. Curiosity is insubordination in its purest form. And I think that is amazing, right? Wow. Let's see. Okay, my why. I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier is got to pay attention. She talks about this kind of living in this regime change, this environment, and I know I mentioned, she thought, her university education wouldn't be affected. Eventually, it was. She thought she would be able to have control of her own classroom and not be mandated to wear the scarf. Guess what? She did. She had to. So I think it's important to pay attention with stuff like this, but also, like I said, in my other roles, education, public education. It's important to pay attention. When we don't pay attention, when we take our eyes off the goal and off the prize, things happen. People work their own agendas sometimes, and what we thought we had, we don't anymore. So that's kind of my why. I don't want to. I think we're reasonably smart people. I don't want to repeat history that didn't work out so well. So I think the last part too is the importance of using literature as protection, whether it be escapism or survival. I think that's incredibly important. I'm going to go back. The little side note, which is really interesting, when I chose the book, which was, like I said, end of the summer, last fall sometime, I did not realize that they actually just released a kind of an indie film last fall on this movie. So it's not in like mainstream theaters at all right now. It's really in independent art movie theaters. I cannot wait to see it. Because, after 2003 and what year is it? It's still an incredibly powerful story. The book itself can be a little tricky to read. There's kind of 3 big sections of it. Timelines are a little tricky to discern, and sometimes names are a little hard, at least for me, because I'm not as familiar with Middle Eastern names, and so I confuse them a little bit. So I take it a little slower, maybe on that. But I think overall, I think the message that this book at least gave to me was so incredibly important. I would like to leave you, I'm talking too fast. I would like to leave you with this quote from her. She said that step by step, she could feel herself gradually leaving reality behind her, leaving the dark, dank cell she lived in to surface for a few hours into open air and sunshine, that when it was over, she returned to her cell. So that is from the perspective of having the book club. They would once a week meet Thursdays for a couple years. And these young people that she had chosen that were so diverse in all their backgrounds, religious beliefs and all of that, would meet and talk about these great classics once a week. And she said that when they would come to the top of her stairs, they would shed their scarves and their cloaks, and they would be the wonderful individual human beings that they intended to be, right? So, taking off, one would be more traditionally dressed underneath, others would have, t-shirt and jeans, and just being able to kind of shed off this imposed cloak or veil, and then have these really great deep discussions with these other members with different perspectives, was so valuable for all of them. Some of these girls went on to move to more democratic areas, maybe the great evil United States, and continue their learning. But I think for her conclusion was that for all of them, the value of being able to be in a safe, protected space to be able to exercise their intellectual freedom there was incredibly important. So I think that's kind of all I have. Anyone have any? I know it was a little fast, sorry. Any questions?
One more.
I can talk loud. Oh, okay, sorry. I was wondering what you thought. It's been a while since I read it, but I remember thinking that her descriptions of people being taken away in the night, for no reason, women being stoned to death, were very matter of fact and subdued.
Yeah.
And she's a good enough writer that had to be a conscious choice.
Yeah.
So it was like, was she not wanting to remember it, or was she trying to downplay it? It was really interesting.
I think that is something that's really interesting. And I think she touches on that just a little bit in a couple different sections, that things became normal. She talks about, living in her apartment, and when Tehran would be bombed by the border dispute with Iraq, there were bombings going off all around them. And she would just, move to the hall in her home, and she had little kiddos at the time, and they would just kind of sleep on the floor in the hall. And then when the bombing stopped, they just kind of moved back, to their rooms. So I think sometimes when you're confronted with such horror, some of the way of coping is just kind of keep going. And I think part of it too, she talked, and I said this a couple times, but how, she thought, education won't be touched, especially higher ed won't be touched. It was. And so we keep pushing, and that's probably a self-coping, mechanism that we all do to a certain extent. You don't realize kind of the progression of things. You don't realize how you've normalized then these morality squads, or the people being taken off the street. And she said, many of her students were just plucked off the street, girls and guys, and were beheaded. So it is fascinating, but we kind of cope with horrendous things in ways like that, I think.
I was just going to add to that. I read this book in my book club, and with a dear friend who was in the club who had come from Iran and had been swept up off the streets when she was 17 and spent 3 years in Evin, the really horrible torture prison in Iran. And matter of fact, in fact, when she was released, she had a really hard time readjusting to life outside of prison, but she experienced real torture in that prison. So, I'd also point out that it was a totalitarian regime before this one too. So
yes.
And her grandmother, once the Shah said the veils were forbidden, she never left the house again because she felt her religion was being compromised. So
I think that's really interesting to note. I just read an article, I think it was from January, that spoke about in Afghanistan, women are not supposed to be near the windows of their home because you're not supposed to be seen from the outside. So not only your home is not the refuge that maybe you once thought it was, that you can't even be seen through windows either. So it's fascinating. But I want to impress though, this is not, the author loves this country. This is where her heart is. So she's not trying to denigrate or bash the beautiful culture that she grew up with, but just to recognize these regimes and what totalitarianism can be in many places. So, any other questions?
She actually reads the book. If you did the ebook like I did, she actually reads it.
Oh my gosh, that would be amazing.
It's very good.
That would be very good. Yeah, so she's been living in the United States for a number of years, 1997 or 98, I think. Teaches at Johns Hopkins. You know, part of, I think, what she said her goal was is to make for sure people understand, you know, that where her heart is and what she's really trying to say, and the use of literature to, you know, be a salvation in some aspects. So, anything else?
Any other questions? What's up?
I was wondering, so in the book, they read a number of books and they have various reactions to them. For you, when you were reading it, which of the books that they read was the most interesting in their, did you get any insights about the book from their responses to it?
Yeah, great question. Oh, for sure. And, you know, a few books I had read, you know, before. I had read Lolita, like, 30 years ago or something like that. And it's interesting because we just had this conversation too, because I think when I read like Wuthering Heights and Lolita and stuff, you know, it was like a high school, college type stuff. I really didn't understand the depth of it, you know, reading it for a class, right? I felt my understanding was more superficial, and that's just for me. We talked a little bit. I had read that, I believe it was Toni Morrison had said that, you know, when she had read Huck Finn, so many years ago, high school, it didn't really make the impact on her that when she read it like in her 40s or 50s, it meant so much more to her. She understood the depths of it. So reading through this again is kind of interesting because I want to go back and pick up the things that I missed. Kind of the themes, you know, under Lolita, you know, she was taken. Lolita was 13 at the time. She was basically kidnapped by her stepfather. Her stepfather had killed her mother and picked her up at camp one day and said, "Hey, we're leaving," and she's like, "What?" So she ends up going with him, and he takes her and basically holds her hostage for a number of years, and was very inappropriate. So one of the parts that they talked about with this book club was that, first of all, that, you know, Lolita was 13, marriages in Iran 9, right? So, you know, we think about it, you know, originally they were like, oh, it's horrible because, you know, child of 13 years old, which is a child, but now their laws are even, you know, possibly worse, right? But the other thing that they talked about too was, I think it's one of the first nights that Lolita is like in a hotel with the abuser, is that they're in separate rooms to begin with, but what he had done to her family and had broken her down so much, she looked for comfort from her abuser. And I think that's kind of fascinating, right? So she goes back, and so you wonder why. I also, when I was a probation officer, my first caseload was specializing in domestic violence. And at the time, I volunteered at Safe Home, which is a local domestic violence shelter. And, you know, people always are very harsh to judge, why do you stay in that situation? They're abusing you, why do you stay? Well, I think that kind of example with Lolita kind of explains a little bit, you know, looking for comfort, not knowing what else to do, kind of being, you know, stuck. And I think a lot of, you know, it's predominantly women who are abused, but not always, but a lot of times, you know, women do stay in abusive situations because they see no other place to turn, and they are kind of stuck. So did that answer your question a little bit? Yeah. But yeah, there's a whole list of ones. I want to go back and read, you know, Wuthering Heights again. I want to read, you know, and just dig a little deeper this time. So.
Jodie, as we close out, I'm gonna put you on the spot for just a minute.
Dang it.
Okay, I know.
Dang it.
So for those of us who believe in the power of story,
Yeah.
and we believe in the power of literature, and we believe that all of us, but particularly our students, deserve access to literature.
Yeah.
Is there anything that we can do to help that cause
Right.
as we go forward?
As I kind of said earlier, pay attention. Pay attention to what's happening in your community. Make sure you know who you're voting for. Really research them. Make sure they may be aligned with your values. Make sure the votes that they're taking, whether it be in Kansas or in DC, align with your values. As you guys all know, there's a constitutional right to read, right? Don't let that get taken away from us because we're not paying attention. I have the feeling, that I guess thinking about this over and over throughout the last, few years and what I've seen, we thought as for women's rights, we thought we had a lot of things down. Throughout the 70s, people, Equal Rights Amendment, and oh my gosh, we can get a credit card, we can buy a house, and thought things were going in the right direction. And in my perspective, I think sometimes we take our eye off the prize. We let our foot up off the gas and we don't pay attention. And other people are paying attention. Keep that in mind. So.
Thank you, Jodie.